Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Can everyone hear us? I don't know that we need these.
We might not need the
Okay, cool.
headphones.
I
Yeah.
got a thumbs up even from people in the back. Okay, I'm gonna put that on the ground. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
So we're obviously here to talk about the state of narrative podcasting, which is like a deeply important part of our industry. Um, but it's changed. And so I think I want to start by, do you want to introduce yourself, Annie?
Yeah, sure. My name is Annie Brown. I'm an executive editor at BBC Studios. My career really started. I was on the original team of producers for The Daily for the first 5 years of that show. Made 1619, then made Ghost Story at Pineapple with Wondery, and now am making narrative stuff and non-narrative stuff at the BBC.
Love it. I think I am gonna try
Okay,
this.
and I would love a pair of those too.
Could we get her a pair of headphones?
That'd be great.
I think it's actually
Thank
just to drown out the
you.
noise. Um, Perfect. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Preeti Varathan.
Wow.
I run 30 for 30 podcast at ESPN. If you're not familiar with it, it's basically the audio extension of the 30 for 30 sports documentary brand. And as of now, we are kind of a full service seasonal narrative feed. I like to tell people it's like if This American Life or Serial had a baby with ESPN or a sports channel. And even in this time, I think we've really backed narrative, and we really believe that there are audiences who want this kind of narrative podcasting. So that's what I do, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah.
I think it's useful before we start. Like there are, we've been talking about this at a bunch of different festivals, but I know that this is South by, it's Pod Movement, and I kind of want to lay the groundwork for what this conversation will be like. So today, I'm particularly interested in talking to you about how do we succeed in narrative podcasting in 2026? And what does it mean to make a narrative hit today? Because I think it's pretty different than it was 10 years ago. And I also really want to talk about like how do you win with narrative, and what is the ultimate value of narrative, and what can the medium do and learn from the success of chat podcasts? If you only take one thing away from today's conversation, I am just a, we're actually pretty optimistic and hopeful about the nature of narrative, but we're going to be realists about it. And B, I don't think that narrative podcasts and chat podcasts have to be in such dramatic tension with each other. To be honest with you, the listener doesn't really know the difference. I've spent enough time on audio Reddit to know that they're asking all these questions like, well, can it be chattier, or can it be more narrative format? So I think I just want us to have a really exciting and realistic conversation about where the medium is going.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth obviously acknowledging the sort of massive contraction of the industry away from narrative in the last several years. The several houses that exclusively made narrative have shut down. Places that made a lot of narrative are making a lot less of it. And but ESPN and the BBC are two places that are still very much engaged in this kind of work. And I think it's worth talking about how that looks different now that the whole industry and the economy around this has changed.
Totally.
Yeah. So what does it actually like? Why is ESPN sticking with narrative right now?
So I think it's worth remembering that ESPN in general has really thrown its weight around behind documentary. Like this goes beyond narrative audio. 30 for 30 exists because 15 years ago, ESPN execs and creators decided that it's worth creating this prestige documentary brand. I'm not even sure at the time that they knew how much it was going to take off, but we've done all these brand data analysis tests, and literally after maybe ESPN and Sports Center, 30 for 30 is one of the most recognizable brands that has come out of ESPN. So I think ESPN in general believes that there's a lot of staying power in documentary and in the value of documentary, regardless of what headwinds are happening in the industry. And then they made that bet with narrative audio 7 years ago, and it worked out with them. 30 for 30 podcast took off immediately. And so I think there's just general feeling that if you want to convert someone to a lifetime sports fan, you might have an easier time doing it if you go story first with the documentary. I always think about Netflix's Drive to Survive. Drive to Survive kind of created a Gen Z Formula One audience that wasn't there. And I think that was easier than getting them all to sit down and look at race cars. So to me, that's why we're still betting on it, because it's a long-term play. It's not about what's happening in the industry 6 months ago or 6 months from now.
I think that in general, the seeing the value of narrative as not just like what is it doing economically for you right now is like a big part of what we're going to be talking about. The BBC is very similar in this way. I mean, the BBC is still making radio drama, so like it's an institution that is engaged in all kinds of radio making and narrative making that the rest of the world has deemed, sort of
And radio dramas have been happening for decades.
exactly, exactly. No, and now we call them audiobooks. It's a similar vibe at the BBC where there's the sense that like our audience expects this from us. It's one of the things that we provide, but we're like learning how to do it differently.
Yeah. I think one thing that I'm kind of interested in figuring out is like, what does a hit look like?
Yeah,
Right.
right.
And okay, it looks like I can't necessarily toggle here, but I'm actually in like I'm in an interesting moment right now because 30 for 30 podcast has been around for a while. What does that mean in the audio industry? We've been around for like 6 or 7 years, maybe 8 now. But we are like in a pretty exciting way coming off of a hit and like a hit in the truest sense, and so, yeah, the reason I wanted to bring this up is because our latest season of 30 for 30 podcast was called Murder at the U. And, I had high hopes for this season, but everything that we do now needs to be like sort of tempered by, various expectations. And Murder at the U like really took off for us and like in the literal thank you. No, in the literal way, right? Where it's like it was charting, we had high downloads. In February, we were the best performing ESPN podcast, which like we're the only narrative house at ESPN. That felt really exciting. We were up against a lot of like sportscasts and chat shows. And so I've been doing a lot of like, why did it succeed? And I think
especially at a moment where like it is really hard to make a narrative hit right now in the way that like at the beginning of this whole industry, you could make a great narrative, it would chart, it would do well, it like could make a big splash, and then it is just harder to find an audience. So I think it's worth kind of taking a look at this like as kind of an autopsy of like what did you do to actually find an audience and to break through in a way that many narrative series cannot do anymore.
And I'll say that like I do not want to, sleep on how strong the creative was. I think that we got very lucky in the sense that it was a football story that also had really compelling crime elements, like you can't make that up. And it had been unfolding for over 10 years at this point. By the story was coming out, 20 years. We'd had an ESPN team that was dedicated to getting tape far before I joined ESPN, which is like a deep, deep rarity. And we managed to do something that's kind of hard with narrative, which is that, yes, it was a 10 to 20-year-old story, but it had a sense of urgency because a trial was happening right now. And like, it wasn't just, a football player at a really big school was dead. It was that his teammate was going on trial. By the way, the teammate is going to be going on trial 2 weeks from now as you're listening to this podcast. And I think that it's kind of rare to be able to capture both this sense of like, this is a story that's evergreen and also this is a story that's taking off now. And so I don't ever want to sleep on the creative. And we had like incredible, incredible people at ESPN who had been saying breathlessly for 10 years, like ESPN needs to get into crime. And I think those people were right. But the thing I actually want to spend more time talking about is that beyond the creative, I think we had an incredible team of people, and I want to shout out Devin McGowan here, who like really, really, really thought about how to market this. And I think one of my big lessons from Murder at the U has been that actually, if I only have 30 minutes, my 30 minutes are better spent thinking about what feeds can we drop this into? What is our promo swap plan? What crime newsletters and crime audiences can we notify about this? Who in like, we are under the Disney organization. If ABC has 2020, which is a huge crime audience, if I have 30 minutes to like make nice with the senior producer of 2020 to see if he wants to take that story, that 30 to 40 minutes is better used doing that than perfecting the cold open, which I think has been like a big arc for me, which isn't to say that I'm not like deeply proud of the craft of Murder at the U. I think it's excellent. But I think the reason that we succeeded is because we knew we have a sports hit, but we also have a crime hit, and we don't necessarily have a crime audience yet. And so I think, I mean, without getting into every single detail of it, it's like we had a full feed drop strategy. We had a promo swap strategy. We had an ABC 2020 strategy. We not only, thought about how to capture our audience, we thought about how to capture an audience that Disney already had, but was somewhere else in the organization.
Right. I mean, I think we're both kind of former narrative snobs, in the sense that there was a
Sort of, yeah.
time. Sorry, and maybe even current narrative snobs, but the sense that that if you just make a really great thing, people will find it, and it's going to take off. And sometimes that happens. You get lucky, and that happens. But I think that there's just like a recognition right now that it takes so much more than that you have to actually go out and find the audience where they are, and some of that has to do with, I think, what I'm hearing you say is like there's like collaborations across what the BBC is really focused on within that is like, because we don't have a great audience within the States, or we have a lot of obviously brand recognition, but how many podcasts on the BBC are you listening to? Maybe fewer than you would if you were in the UK, so we are partnering with organizations in the States that already have built-in audiences, that when they start to tap their networks, we are able to just like immediately touch those listeners. But I want to go back to the first thing that you said, where you said you didn't want to sleep on the creative, and you talked specifically about the kind of the heat moment of like, this is urgent right now. I think that is a creative decision, but that's also a business decision in a huge way, where which I think you agree with, but just in the sense that actually the bar for when you pull the lever for highly produced, really beautiful, highly scored, out in the field tape, these gorgeous narratives. The bar has to be so high now if you want to actually capture the kind of audience that we have once captured with these. And one of the ways that you can do that is the sense that the story isn't just a great story, but it's happening right now. This feeling that there is something urgent about it while also being gorgeous.
Which, because by the way, so it's really interesting that you bring that up, because we actually made the decision to hold off releasing the series. The series was essentially ready to go in November, and we were going to release it during football season because we thought, oh, it's a football series. We'll get a lot of, love from the football community. I mean, surprise, surprise, the University of Miami was doing really well, but maybe they didn't want to promote a murder that had happened near campus. So I think that plan was we would have made it work. And then at some point we kind of sat down and said, wait a minute, we have a genuine news hook. A trial is coming in February. Let's launch this ahead of the trial. And then we also kind of made an interesting creative decision where the series wrapped, the trial was still happening, and we went dark. We had a captive audience. They were with us. And we went dark for 2 weeks. And I was very nervous about this because I was like, oh man, the trial's going to wrap. People are just going to Google the result and they're not going to care at all. And we dropped the last episode yesterday. And so far, it looks like that bet paid off, because our 24-hour download data for episode 6 and 7 are actually higher than our episode 1, 2, and 3 download data. So I've never worked on a limited series where that happened, where more people are arriving faster for the later episodes. But I say all this to say that you're absolutely right. And for that reason, at 30 for 32, at least in the podcasting space, we've loosened the grip a little bit. There used to be a rule where if you want to make a 30 for 30, it has to be at least 5 years old. We've totally loosened the grip on that. The show that's coming out in July is only 2 years old. And I think it's okay because it's worth the narrative treatment. And honestly, there are so many phenomenal history pods, but there are also a lot of pods that just capitalize on the thing that a person is thinking about right now. And I actually think that's maybe one of the lessons I've taken away from chat. But I know you have a lot of ideas about how do we learn from the boom of chat, and how do we apply those lessons and that sort of genre to narrative.
Right. So I think that in this way, I've been kind of tracking the when you're not making the super highly produced, polished version of a narrative series, what does narrative look like today, and how can we actually be learning from these other massively successful shows that are just clearly not prioritizing narrative over other kinds of content. And when the Daily began, there was really this feeling that if you tell a news story in this highly polished,
and you were at the Daily's inception.
Yes,
I don't know if everyone knows that, but yes.
Yes. When we started making that show, the sense was that we were stitching an artisanal quilt every day of just ooh, this piece of archive and this score and this and I'm the show is continues to just be a massive success. But I think in the last decade or so, can't be the last decade because The Daily started in 2017. The last few years, I think that we're just seeing that audiences are less hungry or less moved by only like the polish. That like actually, I think that the only currency that really matters now is like authenticity in like how real does the thing feel? How like people listening to like 2 hour long podcasts without any editing demonstrates to you that there's an audience that doesn't care as much about editing as we sort of wish that they would, because we love to edit our things so much. But I think that there's stuff to be learned from this, like the range of like you open the faders and people can just talk and you put it out on the air versus you spend 2 years building the story and crafting every word of it. And I think that like it comes down to this question of like what is narrative at the heart of it. And to me, it's basically just like a story told in chronological order that has characters and scenes and then a big idea at the end. And so like trying to figure out, is there a way that we can tell narrative in a more conversational format that actually can mimic or tap into that feeling of comfort that you have listening to a real person have a real conversation with another real person, but you're also along for the ride. And so we're trying out this there are a lot of shows that I think do this to varying degrees, but we're just launching this show, Big Lives, behind me, in a couple of weeks with Emmanuel Joji from Serial and This American Life and Kai Wright from WNYC. And the goal of it has been that these are two incredible narrative thinkers, but they're also really great just as people talking. And so the show is essentially like research and reporting based, but then they're just telling each other a story that's structured, a story that has like that has the sense of where we're going, what the thesis is, and like how we're gonna and when we get there, the feeling that we want to have, but also allows for like life between the beginning and the end of that. That there is like that you have the sense of like a conversation that's real, that's happening between two people. And what's been interesting about that and borrowing from chat formats in that way is it also just obviously it just reduces the production load, which means that that you can be tapping into urgency faster. You can be tapping into the zeitgeist.
And is there going to be a video element to it?
There will be a video element to it. It's also a lot easier to imagine, a video narrative podcast that is people telling stories rather than scripted and a lot of archive. I think on the other end of kind of like the narrative spectrum, like from chat show is just opening the faders and talking, is like a literal audiobook. Right?
Yeah.
That there is like a story that is the entire thing is scripted, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. It's just like, this is just a narrator telling you a story. And I think one of the interesting things is like as chat shows are taking off, so are audiobooks.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of interesting, right? Because it's like I'm totally tracking on everything you're saying, and I think that there's this there is a premium on authenticity now, but and maybe I'm like too colored by the fact that people just really came out in droves for Murder at the U, but it's like something like Murder at the U, 30 for 30 is definitely throwing its weight behind this idea that like we should make something that is really like highly produced, that feels like a narrative. But the question that I've actually started to ask myself is like, is it easy to listen to? Sometimes I feel like this is not true of all narrative, but sometimes I feel like there can be a feeling that you get when you listen to a really like well-made narrative podcast where it's just like kind of hard to listen to. Like there's like a hat on a hat feeling where it's like, maybe it's that the writing is a little bit too overwrought. And this is not true for any of the ones that are really good, but like
Right.
it can feel like you're overdoing it a little
Right.
bit. And maybe to the point of Big Lives, like it's just easier to hear them have a conversation.
Right.
And it's funny, you described that. And to me, it's like, I don't know whether that's narrative or chat, but it maybe doesn't really matter,
It kind of doesn't matter in the sense, but I think in the sense that we care about storytelling.
Yeah.
So we want to tell stories. In that sense, it is very much, a well thought through story.
Totally. But the thing I was going to say about Murder at the U is that like, we made a lot of style choices for that pod that we're going to try and make it feel like it was in this world where like both football and a murder could happen. And it's like, we kind of opened.
What does that mean? What do you mean?
Like, what I mean is like we, instead of like opening the show with either silence or like a big orchestral score, or like just like quiet ambi, it's like we opened the show with like a banger from the early 2000s. Like we opened the show with Rick Ross, you know what I mean? And we were like, screw it. We're just going to like it's going to give you the feeling that you're in a car, and like if the volume is too loud and you're like, shit, I want to turn that down. And then you're going to be in a car with
Right.
our main characters. And it's like, that's not like necessarily new to narrative, but then we wanted that kind of feeling to propagate throughout the entire score.
Right.
And I think the thing I kept asking myself at any given moment is like, if I hit play, do I feel like I can be doing the dishes and listening to this? Like,
Right.
is it feel easy? And I think sometimes narrative does feel easy to listen to, and sometimes it feels really laborious and hard.
Right.
And so I think you were so right about authenticity, but I think the question that I keep coming back to is like, what have I learned from the chat pods? What I learned about them is that they're just not hard to listen to.
Right.
Like you can really hit play and just flit away and come back and do different things. And I'm like, how do I capture that magic narrative?
Right.
And if the task of the narrative is to be really absorbing, then like how do I genuinely make something that feels really bingeable?
Totally. Right.
Because to me, like the lesson from audiobooks and also the rise, honestly, of graphic audio is that I don't think people only want to listen to chat. I think they just want to listen to something that feels transporting and engrossing.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means like I want to be on low mode. I want to be on like low battery mode and this thing can just go. And sometimes that means like you have to arrest my attention immediately and then not make it effortful to stay with you. So I don't want like an endless dump about a history lesson in the middle of like a section.
Right.
Because the host is just so sure this matters, but you've lost your audience.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of what I'm chewing on a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the audiobook phenomenon is an interesting one to try and learn from here too. There's another title at the BBC that does really well called History's Secret Heroes, and it's basically just like Helen Bonham Carter telling you a story about a person from history that you haven't heard of. And it's, it's a script that she's reading in chronological order with scenes and with, and obviously, Helen Bonham Carter is a huge name and we love her. And so, we'll come for that. But it's also just in terms of like thinking about how to make narrative sustainable within our current budgets.
But also that's so interesting because like that's not urgent.
Yeah.
Right? That's not like it's highly produced in the sense that it's going to sound nice, but it's not like hard to make.
Right.
And I bet the most expensive part of that is our talent fee.
It is. Yeah.
So
sure.
it's like I would love to figure that out at ESPN. Like what's the version of a sports story, right? But like why do you think that that's done so well?
I mean, I think that obviously the writing has to be good. The it has to be engrossing, like you say, but I think that there is a feeling of like wanting, it's interesting because I love audiobooks as well. And I find that I even listen to audiobooks more than I listen to narrative series these days. I mean, there are fewer narrative series to listen to. And I think asking myself the question of like, why am I listening to audiobooks more? In some ways, it is a little bit like, I don't really like it when a podcast tries too hard. Is like selling me too hard.
It's not that easy to listen to.
Yeah,
it feels like a little cringe.
Like, this is the most important story. This story will have the biggest impact. La la la. So you can take off that like this is trying too hard by being looser and more conversational, more comfortable, or you can kind of take it off by being like, I'm just going to tell you a story. And I'm like, and we're just going to be in story mode the whole time. They both, I think, do a thing where they lift that kind of the load from the listener or from the story itself to have to like rise to a certain level in order to justify such like big statements we're making about it. So I think that in both of these cases, though, like one of the things that we're trying to do at the BBC is trying to figure out, like, how can we make these shows that have narrative at the heart of them more sustainable to make, just so that, like, and the BBC is like coming in there. People make narrative series at the BBC, like one producer by themselves with no story editor.
And when you told me this, I was like, whoa.
It's crazy. So in some senses, we're actually like, we're adding one layer of editing, which is I think unusual to be adding production layers right now in podcasting.
And wait, so it's one producer and then is the idea that you edit them? Is that?
Well, now.
Okay.
That's a part of my job now, but I just mean that the teams themselves are very lean, in the sense that, when I was at Pineapple or at the New York Times, there was this moment where our teams were just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I think we all kind of remember this, where there's like suddenly we have like a lot of producers that like and what are
I remember the days
doing?
Like, you would get 2 story editors maybe because
right.
I think that was like this American Life's model for a really long time. It's like there were multiple story editors on every episode.
Right. And I remember feeling the kind of weight of that being like, I think we actually move a lot slower because of the team size. And there's obviously a happy medium place to fall. But I think when we're asking ourselves this question of like what's going to allow narrative to survive, one of them is that they just can't be so expensive to make that then they have to make so much money back to justify it. So like, in terms of like if you borrow from these chat formats or from the audiobook format, and that allows you to make something in a less highly produced and therefore just like more sustainable way, it just means that your podcast doesn't have to blow the roof off in order to justify its existence. And so when you're not able to find the Murder at the U that taps into like a murder trial happening and football and ABC and ESPN, and you have like a perfect, like, all like the perfect storm of all of these things, how do we continue to make this work that like we love to make and we know that audiences want to hear when even when it's harder to find these like massive audiences? And one very simple way is they just have to be cheaper to make, and then you can keep making them.
And do you feel like the stuff that you've made is worse off because of it?
I actually don't think so, in the sense that I mean, there are certain stories that I think do require the extremely produced approach. Like I'm like, and that lever should be pulled. But I'm not always craving that from every story. And so I think in some ways, like it doesn't actually you end up with a different product, but like, I think it can be more fun. It's like it feels fresher to me to be making something that like is in a slightly different format than just narrative or just chat.
It's also interesting, like we were talking about this earlier, but I think a little bit about how like Heated Rivalry basically definitely didn't have the kind of budget that you expect for an HBO limited series. And I remember I was talking to one of the execs like recently who made it, and she was like, yeah, and for that reason, the showrunner, Jacob, just didn't have a lot of editors. And so the final product is like his distillation. It's like really, really, really what he and his core team wanted. And obviously that one hit. But I think the trade-off of having fewer people is that sometimes it can just be exactly what the creative at the heart of it really wants it to be. And that can be like an interesting thing. But, and at the same time, like we have story editors for a reason. So I feel like those trade-offs must be hard to deal with on a daily basis.
I mean, you got to have a story editor. There's just like, it's impossible to make anything without an editor that's any good. I don't recommend that at all. And so I think that just like for me, it felt like, you should swing for the fences on like very rarely at this moment. Like we swing for the fences for these huge things. I mean, I also think that that's our calculation within the BBC based on, and I think that this is kind of where this whole conversation is going. I have no idea what time it is also.
We're okay.
Okay, great. Where this conversation is going is really about like what value does narrative have within your organization? And if you can answer that question, then you can make stuff that actually meets that value. So like at the BBC, I think part of the value is that we have an audience that cares about storytelling, but we also have a staff that really wants to tell stories, and that is committed to this kind of storytelling. So like, part of it is like figuring out how can we get our producers excited about the stories that they're making, even when they don't have the kind of like the budgets or the long-term calendars that we've had to make these bigger to take these bigger swings. I think that like for 30 for 30, you have a very specific role within the larger organization.
Right. And so what's interesting is I was going to say, like, from our end, I always want the bar for greenlight to be very high. And it is, at one point we'd have, and this isn't true just for audio. Like at one point, I think our senior director of development would say, like, it's actually like easier to get into Harvard than it is to get a 30 for 30 made, both on the doc and audio side. We just have like a very, very low greenlight rate.
That seems right.
Yeah. And that sounds right to me. But on the flip side, I also know that like, if I don't regularly put things in the feed, like we'll lose our audience because just of the way that podcasting platforms work and the way that like search and discover works, like it just won't happen.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm in a moment where I'm like, okay, I want to be able to bet on like big winners like Murder at the U. And honestly, we're hoping that the show that's coming out in July is going to be like a great follow-up to that because it is the same kind of like 1 in a million story. And that's just luck. But at the same time, I'm also thinking about like the thing I think I've actually learned from like what you're describing, leaner teams and chat, is that, can we put out something can our like third or fourth season of the year be a genuine combination of narrative and chat?
Yeah.
Can it, and that's kind of what we're planning for, which is like, it's going to center a big star, but if the first episode is this like really kind of sucks you in narrative treatment, can the rest of it just be like a conversation with the star? And is that fine? And will people like sort of be bought in, you know? And I think for me, like the leaner teams thing is interesting because we are definitely like much leaner in house at 30 for 30 than you would expect. Like I think it's always leaner than people think it will be. And then I just staff up contractors to try to grab them. But it's always a judgment call of like, I do think that something like a Murder at the U really did need like,
Of course. Yeah.
because we were going through like 10 plus years of archive and all this
Totally.
other stuff. And we were like doing it on these crazy timelines. And even then we didn't have the teams like we did back in the day.
Right.
There
right,
weren't like 20 people working on this. There weren't 12 people working on this.
Right.
And a lot of what I had to do was people who were really excited, like borrow people from the investigates and reporting and other parts of ESPN who wanted to be a part of this and say, hey, I know your day job is figuring out how ESPN is supposed to use AI. That's literally what one of our reporters does for a living.
Yeah.
But I know you're really passionate about this.
Yeah.
So do you mind between like putting the baby to bed and waking up the next day, giving me notes on a script at 11 p.m. And I think like, I just want to be like very clear eyed about what some of the reality is here. It's like a lot of people who worked on this project had different day jobs.
Yeah.
Like the two reporters had other day jobs too, but they had been working on this for 7 years. And I think that's some of the calculus, you know, we've been making at ESPN. But,
Yeah.
you know, but like and also you'd sort of like ask me the question about like, what is my job? It's
Yeah.
like, I think I started this role 2 years ago and I feel like something that I had to really come to terms with is that to do my job successfully, I had to, yes, still be like a creative executive producer and still make judgment calls about like, oh, should we pay a bunch of money to start the series with Rick Ross? Is that worth it? And also, a lot of my job is like making important relationships with people in marketing and people in integration and people in synergy
Yeah.
and like developing relationships across the Walt Disney Company because it doesn't matter how good the thing is. If I have not like created a connection between our thing and an already cultivated audience,
Right.
it will fail.
Right.
Like, and I think that's been like a really, like I said earlier, like I think it's been like a really kind of at first sort of grueling realization, but now kind of an exciting one where it's
Yeah.
like, no, actually like part of my job has to be thinking about business strategy.
Right.
If I put my head in the sand and only think about creative, all of our projects will fail.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean the creative is not really good, but it's like ultimately I think Murder at the U succeeded because, you know, it was ESPN really has a football audience, but ABC really, really, really has a crime audience. And by the way, I had come from, 5 years at NBC where we were trying to serve the Dateline audience.
Right.
And so I was used to trying to create something that would work well for true crime audiences, but was technically prestige.
Right.
And I think like knowing, like cultivating that relationship, like I mean, we're going to ask this question of like, what does it mean to succeed? And obviously like download data is really helpful. But to be honest with you, I would have told you, even if the Murder at the U downloads were soft, I would have said Murder at the U is a success because a team at ABC 2020 decided to turn our podcast into a 2.5 hour 2020 special. Like that's huge, and it's like that's like a huge, huge, huge win. And even if very few people had come to this, all of this work got turned into something that like millions of people came to.
Yeah.
And by the way, like all the podcast reporting was on it and we were trying to push to the podcast. So like, and maybe we can talk about this later, but it's like I've been kind of rethinking my feelings on IP, and like the IP bar doesn't always need to be Hollywood, although we want that too. The IP bar can look a little bit different. And so like that's that in that way, like my job is different than I thought it would be. Like my previous job had me like 100% creatively in the weeds, and this job is definitely 50-50. And I think I'm better for it, and I think the shows are better for it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think to me, like when you and I have talked about like the different strategies at our different organizations, it's like when you have those levers to pull, when you can go to like 2020 and get and like with the right story, when you're able to like then you can take these big swings with bigger budgets because you can potentially find the audience on the other side of it. And if you can't quite pull those levers for like massive marketing on the other side, then part of the thing that we're doing is figuring out, okay, then how do we make the production side more sustainable? Like they just have to kind of match in the sense that there was a long time where we were just like pouring production into creative.
Like this is going to be the next serial. We're going to give it whatever amount pocket of money. Like,
right. But then it didn't actually have the kind of marketing and promotion and excitement to match that. And then we were all asking ourselves the question of like, why is narrative failing? And so I think, you just have to be looking at both sides of that equation in order to succeed right now. They have to be equal.
And can I like I want to like kind of double click on something you said. Like the question of like why is narrative failing, of course, is like the counter to the question of like what does it mean for a narrative to succeed?
Yeah.
And I feel like one thing that's hard too, I've learned a ton from being embedded in a documentary team. Like when when ESPN spends a ton of money making a six-parter about Serena, or making these like really big films, like some of that is because they're thinking about like profit structures and profit incentives. But I can tell you, like from the jump, you don't invest millions and millions and millions of dollars into something because you're only thinking about whether you can make money off of it,
Right.
And I think that like, and I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this, but
Yeah.
I think I've been thinking a lot about like ultimately what is the value of this medium
Yeah.
and like if we can if we are just out here trying to make like endless pockets of money with narrative audio, like there's almost definitely better mediums for it.
Yeah.
But I think it took me a while to realize that like, yes, like I'm obviously having, like ad revenue, profitability, all those kinds of conversations when we're thinking about 30 for 30. But the real thing I'm always thinking about is like ESPN has decided to invest in documentary because they think it is a way to pull in a specific kind of audience.
Right.
And I need to do, if I'm doing my job right, I've pulled in that audience. And that's like the real thing that I exist for that, or I exist to win awards, which
Right.
like can be like a legitimate thing an organization cares about because it elevates their brand.
Right.
Right. But like every time I'm greenlighting a project or as a third rail, like I genuinely exist to be a much, much cheaper incubation
Right.
thing for Disney IP. So it's
Right.
like and look, I should tell you, like, I think the reason that people got really upset at some point that everything about greenlighting narrative turned to IP was because I feel like that was deeply overblown. There was this idea that like every single narrative podcast was going to turn into a Hollywood unicorn. But I'm
Right.
actually not like cynical about IP, mostly because I think that like the hit rate, it's just a probability problem. It's like we prescribed probabilities to that were way higher than they should be. But even at 30 for 30, we've been around for what, 7 or 8 years. We've already turned one of our podcasts into a TV show. We turned another one of our podcasts into a 2020 special. We're hopefully in conversations to figure out if we can do more with that. Like, I don't know. That seems like a pretty decent hit rate to me, and that's kind of
Right.
what I would expect. So to me, like those are the three rails. It's like, is it prestige, and therefore it's really, really strong PR?
Right.
Is it like an audience lever, even if that audience lever is a loss leader, or ultimately is it genuine IP incubation
Right.
that's just way cheaper than even making one pilot? And I still think that's like a legitimate third category.
And I think that we've been talking about the IP thing because it does feel like for a long time we were all kind of like hoping that would save our narrative industry, and it didn't quite show up in the way that we thought. But I think that lever really works when you're in when you're in an organization that already has a TV or film component, right? Like, and that is true about ESPN. It is true about the BBC. But like, thinking about IP is like it just didn't work as much when you're in like an independent
And definitely to your
organization.
point earlier at the amounts that we were paying for it.
Right.
Like
Exactly.
the IP
Yeah.
thing also only works if the inputs are cheap.
Right.
But
Right. Right. Yeah. But I think that I think that one of the things I've taken away from our conversations about this uh before now and now is just that like to ask yourself within your organization of like what is the value of narrative here, like what is it that this is, like why are our publishers commissioning this story? Is it because like at the BBC they're commissioning some narrative series because they make big headlines in like if you break news in like these massive stories, like that's really important to the BBC. So it's not just it's not just winning
and,
awards,
and
but
why
it's
is that important to the BBC?
well, that's a good question. Yeah, exactly. So it's important to the BBC because that's why people come to the BBC, because they trust the BBC are going to give them are going to give them the news. So like that is the audience filter, like you said. But I think if you can just like be clear within your own team, and I think for myself, being clear of like what is it that we're trying to do with narrative, then you can build a production model that actually allows you to succeed at that thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the thing that I'm still mulling through and haven't totally cracked is like, how do I, especially because I run like a seasonal feed, it's like, it does seem like a lot of kind of revenue generation and general like platform models require that there's like frequency and frequency and frequency and frequency. And that's why you've seen so many of these narrative feeds turn into always on. I think I don't want to lose our documentary roots. And so I think I've been in this moment where I'm like, do I just make more while still maintaining quality for the same amount of money and like hope for the best? Do I try to take, stories that already existed? Like in some senses with Murder at the U, it's not actually cheating, but it kind of felt like cheating because I got to take advantage and my team got to take advantage of reporting that had already existed, had started like 7 years ago.
Right.
It's
Right.
like the thing is like you can't fake
That
that.
you didn't
Like
have to fund. Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
then exactly
Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
that a different unit funded. And
Yeah.
so I think I haven't quite cracked this and
Right.
I feel like and who knows, maybe this time next year I'll be like we're an always on feed and let me tell you about why we're an always on feed and actually we have a video podcast too and let me tell you about
Yeah.
that as well. Like I'm actually open to that and like we are genuinely having developmental conversations about like it's also weird being like the audio extension of a film brand but then talking about a video podcast. It's like what does that even mean? What are we
Yeah.
doing here,
Yeah.
So
That's called documentary. Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's clear. I don't know that
No,
everyone
but
on
it's
YouTube
not.
wants to watch like
No,
endless amount.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Although I was gonna say the kids, but they're my age. No, like the people on TikTok are literally watching like 30 to 40 to 55-second drops of documentary and then going to like part 28 and part 245. Like it's just wild.
Wait. You're saying that ESPN is doing a kind of like of the
ESPN, I think we're trying to do
I
it
see.
because it's just like a ownership issue, but
Yeah.
other places have done this thing where they're taking 2-hour documentaries or an hour-long documentary, and they're literally splicing
Right.
it into
Into
like
little bits.
40 parts and
Right.
just dropping it on TikTok, and those are doing really well. So
Right.
like,
Right.
what do I know? Like, honestly, maybe if we did find like a documentary visual audio version that was basically the film and put it on YouTube, it would actually do pretty well.
Yeah.
But I say all this to say that like, I think the thing that I'm still trying to crack is like could I right now it sort of feels like the way that 30 for 30 podcast works is that we basically need to create like a completely like we learn from things that we've done in the past, but we need to create like a completely new and robust marketing strategy around every single season. Like we
Yeah.
almost treat every single season like yes, we have our existing audience, but we need to go like find the new audience that is going to love this, And it's like this season it was the crime audience. The upcoming summer I'm hoping it's also like actually a version of a crime audience too. But then for the show that's coming out in the fall, I don't think it's a crime audience. And
Yeah.
for one of our other big successes, Girl versus Horse, like that wasn't a crime audience at all. That was actually like a queer like sapphic, like running, marathon obsessed. It was a completely different audience. And we had to like,
Yeah.
so I think it can be hard to think about how to like build every one of those audiences. And in
Right.
some senses, like Girl v. Horse was more of like a prestige play than a giant audience play.
Yeah. Yeah.
And honestly, it was like a play at getting at one of ESPN's priorities, which was trying to attract more women and queer
Right.
women at that. Right.
Right.
So like, I know I've talked myself a little bit in a circle, but it's like, I just want people to be like, to know and be open eyed that like, there are like, I don't want to sort of have like the clouds over my eyes, right? It's like there are problems that I'm still trying to crack that our team is still trying to crack.
Yeah.
But it's been hopeful to know that like the medium isn't broken. People still want it. They don't want every single version of it. They
Yeah.
don't want the like trite hat on a hat, like overwrought. This is going to be the most important story you ever listen to version of it.
Right.
But I do feel like the strategy around knowing that we literally, unless we change the feel of the show, we can't be a weekly or a daily
Right.
is like taking advantage of other existing feeds
Yeah.
and like kind of creating these new robust marketing plans
Yeah.
from scratch. So
Cool.
yeah, like
Yeah.
it's like it's just a balancing act and it's but I think the thing I like fundamentally believe in my heart of hearts is that like like our industry is not that old and you don't get to like kill off a medium just because there have been headwinds, right?
Yeah.
And also B, like I do genuinely believe that when it is good, people want to listen to narrative. And I think we've seen this in crime more than anywhere else.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah.
And like even more so than just like, I mean, the crime chatbots do really well, but there's like a hunger on the subreddits for crime investigation. They're just not mutually exclusive.
Right. Right.
know? Yeah.
Should we take some questions?
Yeah. I mean, are we set up to ask questions in?
We sure are.
Yeah.
Are there any questions? You're like, we explained it all. No, there's not a single one. We also can keep talking. There's one over there.
You mentioned the obviously the passion around 30 for 30. It's one of the great brands in sports journalism. It seems to me you're competing with another audience which is past 30 for 30s. And I can still remember the first 30 for 30, and I can remember the first 30 for 30 podcast. And I'm going to look at the next series you put out and evaluate it against all of your legacy episodes. How do you deal with that kind of pressure as well?
Good question.
It's a really good question because it's so funny that you bring that up, because with Murder at the U in particular, a lot of people have been like, "Oh my God, I love this. It like really reminds me of the Sterling Affairs." And I'm like, I'll take it. The Sterling Affairs was one of our like earliest 30 for 30s and was like a huge, huge, huge success for us. To be honest with you, I think it's a good problem to have. I think it's like a good problem to know that people loved the inception of the brand so much that you have to honor those bones. But I try to tell my team to not overly worry about whether I think it's easier to like quickly know what made those early seasons work, and then to say, okay, like those are our cardinal North Stars. There has to be some intrigue. It has to feel like it's saying something interesting about the world of culture and sports. And you can't like fake characters and fake drama and fake voices. Like I think we know that. But I also feel like if we worry too much about replicating the successes of the past, we're going to stop being innovative. And then before we know it, like 30 for 30 will be a brand that just reminds you of something that happened 15 or 20 years ago rather than a new and innovative brand. So I don't know if I've answered your question directly, but it's like, it's something I wrestle with all the time. I'm always trying to figure out, like, are we honoring the initial bones? And I know on the film side too, by the way, everyone of course is like wants to make new stuff, but they're like, is this as good as the originals? And I think that like the only way that you reckon with that and deal with that is just like to make stuff that you think is good right now while remembering what made the other stuff, great. Like, I don't know if that's something you deal with.
I mean, that's such a great, I mean, I like make stuff that you think is good right now is a great, just like mantra to live by.
Yeah.
If you think it's good, then it's probably worth making.
Also, like, audiences don't always know what they want, It's like sometimes it's fun to give, like, I don't know that everyone at 30 for 30 feet thought they wanted murder, but they're listening to it. So
yeah, I thought about this with like, last summer when 99% Invisible did their like Power Broker series with Robert Caro. And it's like, obviously it's like, it's so not original recipe 99PI. People really miss original 99PI. Like, where did that go? Where did, and it just like totally blew up. It was like it's a basically a book club, but also like where you're reading a book together and then you interview someone about it. And that like it actually can be that there is this feeling of like experimentation and trying to find new ways of connecting with people. Like it might mean that you get some pushback, like where did the original stuff go? But it also might mean that you're just like reinvigorating your audience and finding new people.
to it.
Yes, thank you. This goes to the lady from BBC Sound. Sorry, I cannot sound like you.
That's okay.
Yeah. So you mentioned of value to the organization, or what in business they tout value proposition. So is it that the value to the organization takes precedence over the value to the customers, or to the value proposition to the customers? So that's the question.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the sense that the value to the customer means that the customer will continue to value the BBC. I think what the BBC is I mean, there basically are, there are two distinct parts of the BBC. One is the public service side, which has an extremely different value proposition than BBC Studios, which is our like commercial side that actually, makes things like Bluey and a bunch of TV shows you didn't know they made, and that side has a different value proposition, which means that they have to find an audience that they can sell ads against, basically. But because the BBC has its heart in the public service, there is also a core value proposition, which is just giving, like, basically serving the entire UK public, which is the charter of the BBC, is like to basically make content for all. So there is the BBC at the heart of the BBC is a real belief in like needing, like wanting to give people wanting to serve the customer in the way that you've said it. It's just at the same time there is a recognition that because the license fee that is the internal fee that Brits have to pay to the BBC by law, because that amount of money could be going down, certainly isn't going up, that the BBC has to be looking for other ways of bringing money in. And that comes from this commercial side where like you have to have a big enough audience outside of the UK to sell ads against. So it's a kind of like, you know, the two things are linked, but they're also separate.
So, does that mean it is in alignment with the mission, values, and vision of the organization? That's number one. Number two, how often do you check that you are actually upholding those mission, vision, and values? Because you are.
Because we aren't.
No. Because you are giving priority to the value of the organization.
Oh, I see. I mean, I think that this is sort of happening. It's definitely happening at the BBC in a sort of constant sense. That I've worked both in the newsroom at the BBC and on the commercial side. And so within the newsroom, the sense of like our editorial obligation to our audience is just in constant. It's like it is the content of almost every conversation is like, what is the point of what we're doing here, and are we serving the audience? I think on the side of BBC Studios, I just think these things are embedded kind of throughout, and so I would say that it's a pretty constant evaluation.
Hi, good afternoon. My
Hi.
name is Tanisha. I'm
Hi.
a narrative podcast producer. And I was wondering, in terms of obviously ESPN and BBC has already a huge platform. But in terms of doing the narrative podcasting and what you spoke about, the idea of how it transitioned into the day, I think it was the Dateline 2020. So that actually turned it almost into its own visual. And then I know you mentioned the history podcast. Do you think that most podcasts in the narrative space do have to figure out a way to have a visual element to it? Like, do you have to produce the audio, but then go ahead and do the video with like YouTube or something like that? Or is that necessary all the time? Because I always kind of like, I'm not really sure. Sometimes I'm like, okay, well, I'll just put out the audio. And I have in some instances, but there's some ideas I have, and I'm like, well, now I have to make sure that I have video.
Right.
What do you suggest in terms of that?
I will come out and strong and say no. I don't think every narrative podcast needs to have a visual element. And I feel like if you believe really strongly that the creative of your narrative podcast doesn't need visuals, or that the audio medium, like I sort of feel like we maybe lost a little bit of sight of the fact that like audio is a medium in its own right and that it serves listeners in its own right. I think the problem that audio has is that it is hard for audio to go viral. Like visuals and short visuals can go viral, but it is very, very difficult for audio to go viral. And so I think we have a little bit of like a marketing and distribution problem, not as much of like a medium problem. I think there are still plenty of people who like to listen to like immersive audio for audio's sake, hence like the deep success of audiobooks right now, hence like the deep investment from Audible and other places in dramatic audio and those types of things. So I'll come in and say that like personally, I don't think that if you feel like you're forcing it, or you feel like you're and it's worth noting like Murder at the U exists on YouTube, but and I know a lot of people in this room will tell me that's not a video strategy. Like it exists on YouTube for SEO reasons, but it's like but there's no like visuals accompanying the Murder at the U version on YouTube. And we're actually doing decent numbers on that. But to me, it's more like if you actually have a narrative podcasting idea that you think could benefit from some kind of visual treatment, totally go for it. Like the Big Lies podcast that you're talking about. You know what I mean? It's like if there's a way to like have visuals associated with it, I think that's great. I think another thing I would think about too is even if the main product is audio only, are there visual social assets you can create so you can have a moment of virality for your narrative podcast, but then still drive people back to the audio only property? Like I take pretty seriously that like audio is a medium in its own right, and not every single thing needs to be turned into a video version.
Yeah, in terms of, I think that this is a question that nobody really has answered yet in terms of the sense of like what's the successful version of a visualized narrative podcast, and that isn't just a documentary, right? And so I think I don't have a like a very clear answer other than I think that you do. I think in terms of like the amount that marketing matters means that you have to have visual assets for like your marketing plan. Like you just have to have like videos that are going down Instagram, that are going on TikTok, that are going on YouTube. And it's, I think for me, the question is like, with a YouTube strategy, one of the questions is like, are we trying to drive people back to RSS feeds? Are we trying to get them to watch it there and then commercialize, like, and then monetize them watching it on YouTube? So I think figuring out like what is the point of the video itself? Is it just to like get more listens? Then like I think if we're trying to drive back to RSS, then like the only thing you can do is just make essentially social videos that are because as you said, you can't go viral with audio.
Hi, I'm just thinking about, I'm a run audience and marketing at a network, and I'm just curious how you guys were talking a little bit about it. I'm curious how specifically you think about, you guys are both producers, you're both responsible for creating the shows, and then presumably there's a person or a team who's responsible for promoting the shows. And I believe really strongly that those two things matter as much as the other one. It's like, I don't know that it's 50-50, but they just both matter tremendously. I'm just curious how you guys think about the like personnel part of that, like how you develop a relationship with that person, how you think about like, hey, I believe really strongly this thing needs to be feed swapped here, and there needs to be a PR plan there. And like, how much of that is a part of like what you're thinking about so far upstream that it's like, I know what the marketing plan should be. I'm going to tell this person. I'm just really curious how you guys think about that. Thanks.
I had a meeting about this morning where I was like, we need to be having a conversation about what our plan is early on so that the producers can be influencing the actual like marketing and promotion plan, because they know what, I mean, we have an incredible, marketing and promotion team, but like the people who are embedded in the story also have a lot of knowledge about what makes it so interesting, And I think the earlier you can have people who are promoting it be involved in the content as well. Like there are times where, we're a week out and, if it doesn't feel like the people who are actually doing the promotion understand the thing that we're making, it's just going to fail, And so, I think that I'm trying to kind of, for myself, but also all the narrative snobs around me, trying to take us kind of like just really emphasize the importance of, if you want to have an impact, you got to find an audience. And the way to do that is to find these opportunities, to find other listeners. So then you need to be thinking about like, what are the shows that you listen to or that you watch? How would you pitch this story to that thing? You know how to pitch a story. So like, I think that trying to tap into the narrative and editorial expertise on your team in order to feed into the audience and marketing strategy is like, it's a huge part of what I'm trying to do in the next, year or so.
I'll plus one all of that, and I'll also say that I think historically we've had a little bit of like a marketing and creative church and state feeling about it, and I definitely was a part of that, and that has like really dramatically shifted for me at ESPN. I think some of it is that I just like really like my marketing team, so I'm like, oh, I want to hang out with you. But if I'm being like real for a second,
which is huge, actually.
Yeah, and I think that like they get it and they want it as much as we do. We're having those conversations honestly, like even pre-green light, if I'm being really, really honest. And I don't know, maybe this is like bad to say, I don't think it is, but I actually I can't do everything on my own. I don't want to do everything on my own, and I actually really, really need like marketing and creative strategic superstars by my side who are going to help us. And I feel like I do feel like I have that at ESPN, and at the same time, like when we made that early decision, for instance, with Murder at the U, to say, oh, we're not just going to try to get a football audience, we're going to try to get a crime audience, like that trickled back to my senior producer, and like we changed the creative a little bit. Like it actually changed the writing, because I was like, oh, every single episode needs to end with a crimey hook, and so that's kind of, I hope that like feels like it answers your question a little bit, but like honestly, I think the people who work on the show sometimes are the very, very best at pitching the show. But if you can get the people who work on the show to be marketing as well, because if they're into it too, it's like they'll fight for it just the way you
Right.
fight for it, and then you're coming up with these strategies together.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, like it's dead on arrival. And now I'm thinking about that for stuff that's coming out in FY27 and FY28. Like now, you know.
Stuff.
Are we done? Okay. Oh,
Hello, my name is Daniel Sarolo. Thanks for the panel. What would be your 3 points of advice for a company that starts their own podcasts in Europe and Canada, especially? It can be bullet points advice.
well, is it a narrative podcast?
Say tech, business, financial, literacy, education.
Do you want to go, or do you want me to take this?
We can go back and forth.
Okay, so I'll start by saying that
Thank you.
I know we're here to talk about the state of narrative podcasting. I genuinely think that if you want to start like a tech or business podcast right now, unless you have an incredible story idea that you think really is like served by a narrative format, I think you're better off starting like a show that's either like a narrative chat hybrid or something that has frequency if you're generating a feed right now, which I know feels like a little bit counter to the spirit of this panel. But the reason I say that is because I think especially if you're starting from scratch, so yeah, like number one, I would say think about whether you have a model that has frequency, and think about whether you can create episodes that can happen like relatively cheaply. Two, think about what sister shows already exist that have gigantic audiences and see if they're willing to bring your hosts on as guests or to do feed swaps or promo swaps so that you can get that audience. And then three, if you do have an amazing narrative idea and you're really, really, really excited about it, nestle the narrative within that larger feed. So you've already created like this is kind of like rather than doing a narrative to an always on format, I would kind of flip it and try to create some kind of like I'm even thinking about the fact that the BBC just launched a new tech show. One of my friends is the host, one of the hosts, and like I think it's smart that they came up with like a very chatty visual first, things that can go viral on TikTok format. I can imagine if like Karen, who's one of the hosts, decided that she wanted to do a narrative podcast, she could drop it in that feed. And even if it didn't have a visual element, it would do well. So that would be my advice. But if you're here because you're like, I love narrative, and actually the idea I have is like an 8-parter, I would actually think about like, who do you want to partner with? Do you want to co-produce and sell that idea to the BBC? Do you want to try to sell it to Planet Money? Like I would think about, is there a different feed or host or format that can absorb that? And then you can kind of make money off of a production fee. So does that make sense? It's like if the idea is like, I want to make this 8-parter that I deeply love, figure out where the audience already is, reach out to those creators and see if you can like co-produce it with them.